Hey everyone. In this video, I'm going to try to keep it short, and I'm just going to focus on the parts of an entity relationship diagram. So the first big part of the entity relationship diagram is right there in the title. It's the entity. Entities are always going to be singular nouns, and an entity is what we want to collect information about. In this diagram I have on the screen here, I have 4 entities listed. They're customer, cust account, and transaction. Each of these entities are going to become the tables when we make a database. We'll talk more about databases in a little bit, but I want to kind of prime your mind a little bit to sort of understand where this is going. Within the entities, we collect something called attributes. These attributes describe the entity. If you look at the customer entity here, you can see that there are a total of 5 attributes that describe customer. Those are cust ID, cust fname, cust lname, DOB, and address. Now, for each of those attributes, we want to have at least one attribute that can uniquely identify each instance of the entity. An instance of the entity is essentially an actual occurrence of it. Or if you're talking in terms of database terms, the instance is the row. So to uniquely identify a customer, we're going to assign the cust ID. And that becomes what's called the primary key, which means that every customer has their own unique cust ID. Now that's going to be very useful for us later on when we start to make these databases. But for now, I just want to stick to talking about the parts of the entity. So we've said that the attributes describe the entity. It's important to note that something can be both an attribute and a primary key. Cust ID is a great example of that. Cust ID is not only an attribute of customer, it's also the primary key of customer. Now, that leads us to talking about foreign keys. Foreign keys are very important, and they're going to be used a lot later on when we get into joining 2 tables together. If we look at the cust account entity, you might notice that both of the attributes there are not only primary keys, but also foreign keys. A foreign key is essentially saying that this attribute doesn't originate inside of this entity. It originates in a different entity. In the case of cust account, for cust ID originates in customer, account number originates in the account entity. Now that's going to come into play later on. Essentially for now, just understand that's how we can tie these tables together when we make a database. If we don't have a customer ID, we don't know who the account belongs to. Okay, but we're going to talk more about why we need to have these foreign keys later. But those are essentially the parts of an entity. They're going to describe using attributes. They're always going to be singular nouns, and they're really important because they're going to become our tables. So I hope that was helpful. Next, we're going to talk about relationships between entities.